You hunch closer to the orange glow, arms hugged tight to your chest, the air around you chill and twitching with night sounds. The fire in front of you is small, just a few stubborn sticks, and it keeps flickering like it might give up. But it doesn't. It crackles, it whispers, and right now, it's your only ally against the dark. This isn't some cozy bonfire in your backyard. No s'mores here. This is survival raw. Ancient, essential, welcome. By the way, it's just us tonight, winding back the clock, no pressure, but before you settle in too deep, give this video a like and hit subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're listening from, and what time it is. Pop it in the comments if you feel like it. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire, this simple, flickering thing, is one of humanity's earliest, quietest triumphs. Nobody shouted, "Hey, we invented fire," because fire wasn't invented. It was stolen, coaxed, and tamed. Maybe lightning struck a tree, and someone dared to carry a smoldering branch. Or maybe it was volcanic, or an accident involving dry brush and sun. Historians still argue whether fire was first used for warmth, cooking, or defense. But either way, once your ancient ancestors figured out how to keep it alive, feeding it twigs, guarding it like a pet, that was it. No going back. Fire gave you light to work past sunset, warmth to survive colder lands, and safety from the watchful eyes of prowling animals. It also made meat easier to chew, and with that came unexpected consequences. Cooked food ran to less time gnawing, which eventually some arms, smaller teeth and jaws. Modern, you might not be here without that shift. Wild. Right, but fire also changed how you thought. Imagine being able to sit and just stare into flames. That's when early humans began to share stories, sing songs, and probably overthink everything. The flickering shadows made imagination possible. That glow became a kind of early cinema for the mind. Here's a fringe tidbit in some early communities. People thought fire itself had spirits. The Greeks had Hestia, goddess of the hearth. The Zoroastrians still treat fire as sacred. There are myths of fire being stolen from the gods. Why? Because it felt magical. And maybe it was. After all, what else can turn wood into warmth, or bread into a meal? Archaeologists once found a site in South Africa where charred bones and plant ash were neatly piled in ancient hearths, dated over 1 million years ago. That's not just barbecue. That's culture. That's someone choosing to stay, to return, to make a place feel like home. And home meant something new. The fire let people sit in one place. You didn't have to flee the cold every night. Eventually, you could build shelter around the fire, and later entire communities. But it all started with one spark. Of course, early fire wasn't all warm hugs and marshmallows. It could turn on you, if left unchecked. It devoured huts, crops, forests. The same thing that let you boil water could scald your foot. The gods giveth and taketh away. Still, humans kept using it, quietly, constantly, almost reverently. Now here's something delightfully weird in some Paleolithic sites. Researchers have found what look like scorched rocks arranged in patterns far from any cooking area. Some believe these were early rituals. Others say it was just kids being pyromaniacs. You know, like you were at 13. Fire, after all, is fun. And later, it became weaponized. Torches to storm castles. Flame to punish heretics. Entire empires burned libraries because the light that illuminated minds also threatened to control. Fire has always been both protector and destroyer. That duality, it lingers in us. But tonight, you don't need to storm any ramparts. Just picture that first human settling in beside a flame, exhaling. Maybe they told someone about the mammoth that got away. Maybe they hummed. Maybe they just watched the sparks fly upward and wondered where they went. That moment, shelter, warmth, connection. It didn't shout, it didn't make headlines, but it made you possible, and it's still with you every time you light a candle, strike a match, or warm your hands by a heater. The fire hasn't gone out, it's just gotten quieter. The thread slips through your fingers, soft and unassuming. It's not flashy, not loud, it doesn't explode or roar. But this little twist of fiber, wound with patience and care, is about to remake your world. Not with fire or force, but with connection, with thread. Humans stitch survival into something more lasting, into culture, into memory, into identity, long before steel, before paper, before any alphabet. Someone sat down and started twisting plant fibers together. Maybe they did it out of boredom, maybe necessity. Maybe they just liked how it felt. Either way, they were making string, and with string, they were making magic. Historians still argue whether string was first used for binding, carrying, or weaving. What's clearer is that once humans had thread, everything changed. You could tie things together, lash tools more securely, fashion snares for hunting, suspend food out of reach of hungry rodents. You could wear it, carry a baby with it, protect yourself from the wind. That's not decoration. That's evolution with flair. Here's the quirky part. Evidence of thread making goes back tens of thousands of years, and some of the best early samples were found in caves, and many of them were made by women. Yep, spinning and weaving. These weren't just domestic chores, they were technological revolutions powered by patient hands. Picture it, you're in a quiet hut somewhere in the Neolithic age. A woman sits cross-legged, pulling fibers from a flax bundle, twisting them over her thigh, rhythmically. Her child is nearby. Her grandmother watches. Maybe they hum, maybe they gossip. Maybe they fall into a silence so deep it becomes a kind of prayer. She's not just making thread, she's making legacy. Now zoom out. That thread becomes cloth. That cloth becomes trade. Textiles are among the earliest traded goods well before coins or contracts. Ancient Egyptian linen, Chinese silk, Andean alpaca wool. These weren't just products. They were status, wealth, even diplomacy. And there's this fascinating fringe theory that in some cultures, thread was also a way of telling stories, like the Andean quipus cords with knots that recorded information. Not writing, exactly, but close. A form of knowledge encoded in fiber. You didn't read it, you felt it, counted it, interpreted the tension, literal tension. But let's get more intimate. Have you ever noticed how a handmade blanket feels different, like it remembers the hands that made it? That's ancient. When early humans spun wool, they weren't just creating something warm. They were weaving in time, one loop at a time, one memory at a time. By the time the spindle was invented, essentially a weighted stick to twist fibers faster, humans were already experts in quiet innovation. This wasn't the age of bronze or conquest. It was the age of soft revolution, of thread connecting villages, generations, continents, and we haven't even gotten to clothing yet. Think about it, once humans started making actual garments instead of just draping hides, identity got involved. Suddenly, you could express your status, your region, your tribe. A thread pulled through a sleeve wasn't just fashion, it was language, and you didn't need words to read it. In medieval Europe, sumptuary laws literally controlled who could wear what. Purple thread, only the elite. Gold embroidery, reserved for royalty. And today's, let's just say your branded hoodie still says something about you. It's still thread, still coded. Even in resistance, thread speaks. Enslaved women in the American South wove secret messages into quilts to guide escape routes along the Underground Railroad. During wartime, prisoners embroidered hope into hidden patches. A needle became a tool for rebellion, or remembrance, or just staying sane. And here's a moment of appreciation. Spinning thread is hard. Try twisting plant fiber into anything stronger than spaghetti. Your ancestors did that for hours every day, quietly, methodically, usually while also watching children, feeding fires, and surviving plagues. The modern world runs on speed, but back then, everything had to be earned, slowly, and yet we barely remember them. The spinners, the weavers, the ones who quietly shaped civilization not with swords, but with skeins of fiber. Their names aren't carved into monuments, but maybe they're there in the warp and weft of every flag, every tapestry, every tablecloth in your grandma's kitchen. So tonight, as you tug a blanket over your shoulder, think of the thread. Think of the hands that spun it, the mouths that whispered while doing it, the hearts that stitched stories you'll never hear. They weren't shouting, but they were speaking clearly, softly, brilliantly, and they never stopped. Your footsteps crunch softly on dry earth. In your arms, a bundle of grain. Behind you, a low, wide basket woven from reeds and brambles, stitched by calloused hands. It's not much to look at. Maybe a little lopsided, definitely handmade. But this thing you're carrying, it might be one of the most powerful inventions in human history. No, really. The basket, humble, quiet, utterly unthreatening, helped reshape the very structure of society. Not through conquest or clever gadgets, but through carrying, through containment, through the simple act of holding something for later. Historians still argue whether baskets came before pottery, or if one inspired the other. What's clear is that baskets show up early, really early, like Upper Paleolithic early. That's around 25,000 years ago. And while the fibers have long since disintegrated in most places, we still find impressions on ancient clay, on stone, even in fossilized mud. Their ghosts linger, woven into our origins. It might seem small, but think about what a basket does. It lets you move more than what fits in your hands. More berries, more nuts, more kindling, more mushrooms you're pretty sure aren't poisonous. And then one day, more grain. And more grain means surplus. That's the quiet revolution. Before baskets, your ancestors had to consume what they gathered immediately, or share it, or lose it. There was no such thing as later. But with baskets, suddenly, you could store, you could save up, trade, plan. And planning changes everything. That bundle of wild wheat you carry home today can become porridge for the next 3 days. That extra fish, dry it, store it, basket it. Now you've got insurance. And with insurance comes security. With security comes time. Time to think, to experiment, to settle down. You start planting what you once only gathered. You build bigger shelters because now you know you'll stay. You raise children who've never known the panic of empty hands. All because of this lump of twisted reeds on your hip. Quirky fact. The oldest known baskets are more than 10,000 years old, found in dry caves in the American Southwest, still woven tight, still doing their job. Archaeologists squealed like kids at a carnival when they realized how well preserved they were. One of them even cried. No joke. Now, let's walk forward in time. As societies grew, baskets got fancier and more political. In ancient Egypt, grain baskets were taxed. In Mesopotamia, surplus stored in baskets was used to pay temple workers. Baskets weren't just for gathering anymore. They were for accounting, for power. And woven patterns began to speak a visual language, tribal identity, fertility symbols, even cosmic designs. A circular weave might mirror the sun. A tight spiral, the movement of water. These weren't just containers. They were stories. In some African and Native American traditions, basket weaving became a spiritual act. Each row symbolized part of a journey. Each loop, a prayer. Some women were buried with their baskets, not because they were just women, but because they were carriers of continuity. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and baskets are in every corner of life. Market baskets, baby baskets, fishing baskets, even punishment baskets. Yes, at one point, if you were caught gossiping or cheating on taxes, you might be paraded through town in a large wicker cage. Not exactly the legacy most weavers were going for. And today, you still use baskets, maybe not reed-woven ones, but digital carts and food containers and laundry hampers. It's the same instinct. Gather, hold, prepare. The shape has changed. The purpose hasn't. Here's a gentle reminder: the person who wove the first baskets probably wasn't celebrated. No mural, no statue, just someone, maybe sitting by a river, testing a pattern they learned from their mother or invented on the spot. It worked. It held. And it held up. There's something quietly radical about that. No bloodshed, no bronze trumpets, just a hand, a reed, and a patient twist. So tonight, when you drop your phone into a basket beside the bed or toss a blanket into the hamper, pause. You're echoing something ancient, something world-shifting. You are, in a small but meaningful way, still part of the weaving, and tomorrow that basket will be there, holding what you need, silently, always. You reach down and press your fingers into the soft, wet earth. It gives a little cool, squishy, almost alive. You scoop some up. It clings to your skin, rich with possibility. Not gold, not silver, not anything shiny or loud. Just clay, silent, ordinary, ignored. But this lump you're holding, it's about to remember something for you, and then for your whole civilization. Clay doesn't sparkle. It doesn't sizzle. But it records. That's its magic. Long before people carved laws into stone or scribbled novels on a parchment, they turned to clay, wet enough to shape, dry enough to harden, tough enough to last. And suddenly, finally, humans could write. But writing wasn't born from poetry or love letters. Romantics. It was born from taxes, debts, lists. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia, dating back to around 3200 BCE, are filled with records of grain owed, goats counted, laborers fed, the stuffy side of civilization. But necessary. You might picture a priest in ancient Sumer, hunched over a flat rectangle of clay, poking it with a stylus as a stick carved to a triangular point. Each impression is a word, a number, a symbol, together. They tell a story. Maybe not the most exciting story, but a story nonetheless. Historians still argue whether early writing developed first in Sumer, Egypt, or the Indus Valley. But there's no debate about what writing meant. It meant permanence. You couldn't argue with a clay tablet. You couldn't say that's not what I said once it was baked. And it started so simply. Before full sentences, there were tokens, little clay balls to represent sheep or oil or baskets of wheat. People would seal them in clay envelopes to tally transactions. Eventually, instead of stuffing envelopes, they started marking the outside. Boom, proto-writing. Fringe fact. Some of the earliest clay invoices had smiley face-like symbols, possibly denoting good standing or approval. Your ancestor may have literally been the first person to say thumbs up. Paid in full. But clay wasn't just about bureaucracy. It became art, storytelling, law. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal texts, was carved into basalt for the public but practiced on clay, over and over. Want to learn to read or write in Babylon? Better get your hands dirty. Literally. And clay, oddly enough, preserved things better than most other materials. While parchment and papyrus rot, and metal corrodes, clay just sits there, waiting. So today, thousands of years later, archaeologists pulled tablets from the ground and read aloud the shopping lists, contracts, and petty complaints of long-dead people. There's something eerily intimate about it, like scrolling through someone's texts from 4,000 years ago. One sheep short again. Loan to cousin due at new moon. Complaint neighbor's goat ate my figs. Human pettiness and paperwork immortal. But let's back up. Before clay was a record keeper, it was a container maker. Clay pots changed how people stored food, water, seeds. They could cook differently, boil instead of just roast. That unlocked new nutrients. Soup happened. Stew happened. And yes, eventually tea. You're welcome. In Japan, some Jomon pottery dates back over 14,000 years, the oldest on Earth. And it wasn't just functional, it was beautiful. Spirals, textures, symbols. Early people didn't see practicality and art as separate things. Why should we? Here's a fun detour. Some anthropologists believe clay figurines, especially the famous Venus statues, weren't just fertility idols. They might have been toys, or even early teaching tools about childbirth. Whatever they were, they show how clay carried more than food or numbers. It carried emotion. And here's a weird twist, literally. Some tablets were recycled. Not eco-friendly recycled, more like, oops. That lawsuit didn't go well, and then they dunked the tablet back in water, smoothed it, and rewrote it. Delete button. Bronze Age style. Eventually, when papyrus and parchment showed up, clay lost its monopoly. People preferred lighter, more portable materials. But even then, in courts and official documents, clay stayed loyal. After all, it didn't burn easily. It didn't get eaten by bugs. And once you fired it, it stayed. So tonight, when you look at a journal, or swipe across your phone screen, or scribble a note with a pencil, think of the clay, the squishy, messy, glorious mud that first held human thought. It didn't shout. It didn't demand attention. It just remembered quietly, faithfully, for thousands of years. And if you're wondering where to find some check your garden after the rain, it's still there, waiting, ready to record something again. You tug gently at a string tied around a bundle of firewood. It doesn't give. You try the other end. Still no luck. Then you spot it, the twist, the loop, the little over-under sneaky bit someone tucked just out of reach. A knot. It's small, almost invisible, but it's holding everything together. Knots are weird. They're everywhere, and yet no one really talks about them. You use them everyday shoes, garbage bags, backpack straps, and you barely give them a second thought. But knots are ancient, and like most things that shape the world, they started small, quiet, clever, absolutely essential. Some of the earliest known knots come from fishing lines found in Europe dating back to about 9,000 years ago. But here's the kicker: we have reason to believe knots go back much further. We just can't prove it easily because knots, by nature, tend to disappear. They rot, they loosen, they're made from stuff that doesn't last. Historians still argue whether early humans first used knots for trapping animals, climbing trees, or bundling firewood. But whatever the case, knots were a way of extending your body. You couldn't hold on to a wild pig forever, but your snare could. You couldn't carry a boat on your back, but your rope could drag it for you. And when boats arrived, oh boy, knots became survival. Sailors, ancient and modern, depend on a whole vocabulary of knots, each with its own purpose. reef knots, bowlines, clove hitches. Some sailors could tie 20 knots in their sleep, which, honestly, sounds like the least relaxing sleepwalk imaginable. There's a quirky little theory from cognitive science that knot-making may have helped train the brain for symbolic thinking. The idea is this learning to tie a secure knot involves steps, memory, repetition, and planning. Kinda like language. Kinda like math. So maybe, just maybe, knots helped you learn to think in sequences and eventually to think in symbols. And some knots became codes themselves. In ancient Incan culture, the Quipu remember that from earlier it wasn't just about thread, it was all about knots. Each knot location, shape, and orientation told a different story. It wasn't writing in the alphabet sense, but it was structured knowledge. You didn't read it, you interpreted it. You're starting to see a theme. Right, these quiet inventions don't just hold things, they hold ideas, memories, intentions. Let's talk about traps for a second. Early knots used in hunting were often slipped, rigged, or triggered. Tensioned lines that could snap a snare shut or yank a creature into the air. They required not just material skill, but imagination. You had to think like the prey, and then build a device that would respond without you being there. That's engineering. That's predictive logic. That's a trap that uses rope and time. How medieval is that? In the ancient world, knots also meant power. Egyptian priests tied sacred knots into their garments. The famous Isis knot was believed to offer protection. In Celtic and Norse cultures, interwoven designs, endless knots symbolized eternity, unity, and fate. Tying and untying became metaphors for love, for curses, for binding spirits. One twist too tight, and you might curse a village. One loop undone, and a soul could be freed. Even today, some cultures still use knot charms. In Chinese tradition, red string knots are given at weddings and New Year's celebrations, symbols of luck and connection. In West Africa, certain knots in woven textiles represent community, hierarchy, or resilience. A knot can be both functional and poetic. That's kind of its thing. There's even science behind them. Mathematicians today study knot theory, an entire field dedicated to understanding how loops and tangles work. This isn't just for fun, although, okay, it kind of is. It has applications in DNA structure, molecular chemistry, and quantum physics. Yep, the way you tied your hoodie strings might have something in common with the inner logic of the universe. Who knew? Of course, not all knots are helpful. Ever tried untangling your earbuds or the mess behind your TV? There's even a term, spontaneous knotting, for how strings seem to tie themselves when left alone. One physicist did an entire study dropping shoelaces into a box to see how long it took them to knot up. Answer, not long. But the real beauty of the knot is in its paradox. Its strength through tension, security through impermanence. It holds, but only because it could slip. It binds, but only because it moves. A knot is alive, in a way a decision frozen in string. So tonight, if your blanket's edge is hemmed or your pajamas have a drawstring, give that knot a little pat. Someone, somewhere, once figured out the exact twist that would keep you warm, secure, and maybe just a little stylish. It didn't take thunder. It didn't take fire. Just fingers, thread, and the quiet genius of knowing how to hold something and let it go. You're walking down a dirt path, and you stub your toe hard on something round and half-buried. You curse softly, PG-13 of course. Lean down and pull it out. It's a wheel, old, wooden, cracked, but still round, still doing what it was meant to do. And for a second, you pause, thinking, wait, how did we ever get around without these? The wheel is one of those inventions that seems obvious after you see it. But it took forever for humans to figure it out. Not fire, not stone tools, not agriculture. The wheel came after all of those. And when it arrived, it didn't roar into history. It rolled in, slowly, quietly, transforming everything in its path. Historians still argue whether the wheel was invented for transport first or for pottery. There's a decent chance that before anyone ever rode on a cart, they were already spinning clay on a wheel to make pots. Functional, simple, clever. The earliest evidence of wheel use dates back to around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamia. That's the same area where writing on clay tablets was taking off. You'd think they'd brag about inventing the wheel in cuneiform. But nope. No grand announcements. No breaking Sumerian dad invents round thing. Just usage, just evolution. The real genius of the wheel isn't the circle. It's the axle. That moment when humans figured out how to let a wheel spin around a fixed shaft game changer. That took problem solving, precision, and materials that could handle friction without turning to dust. Not easy stuff when your tool set includes rocks and sticks. Here's a quirky twist. Mesoamerican civilizations like the Maya had toys with wheels, adorable little carts with animal shapes, but they never used wheels for transport. Not because they weren't smart, they absolutely were, but probably because they didn't have draft animals to pull carts across rugged terrain. A wheel without a strong back to pull it. Just a fancy coaster, back in the old world. Though, wheels caught on fast once they finally arrived. First came sledges dragging heavy loads on wood. Then someone added logs underneath to roll things. Eventually, logs became fixed rolling cylinders. And then, miraculously, someone said, "Hey, what if these stayed attached?" That was the moment, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift like most of history. Wheeled carts changed how far you could go, what you could carry, and who could do it. Want to move stones to build a city wall? Easier with wheels. Want to transport grain from a field instead of dragging it on your back? Wheels. Want to trade with people 3 towns over instead of just your neighbor? Wheels. They didn't just help goods move. They helped ideas move. In ancient Greece and Rome, chariots became the sports cars of their day. Loud, fast, dangerous. But behind the gladiator, glamour were humble carts trundling down back roads, pulled by oxen, driven by tired merchants. It's not flashy, but it's the backbone of empire. The Romans even built their roads around wheels, standardizing the width of chariot axles, which some say influenced later railway gauges. Whether that's true or not, historians still bicker. The impact of wheels on infrastructure is undeniable. Roads, trade, travel, time. And then there's the spinning wheel, a different kind of wheel entirely. But just as world-changing, it made thread faster, better, cheaper. Hello again. Section 2. Entire textile industries were built on its whirring, gentle rhythm. That's not brute force, that's quiet power. Here's a fun fringe story. In 2001, archaeologists in Poland found what might be the oldest wooden wheel ever perfectly preserved in swampy mud. It had been sitting there for 5,000 years, still solid, still almost functional. Just waiting to remind someone that round doesn't mean simple, it means brilliant. The wheel didn't change the world overnight. It didn't crash into history like a meteor. It just kept turning, helping one load at a time, one journey at a time. Slowly carving new paths, quietly extending what humans could do, where they could go, what they could become. And you still live by the wheel. Bicycle tires, office chairs, suitcases, clocks, car engines, elevators, Ferris wheels. If you're lucky, the circle spins, and so does your life. So next time you roll a suitcase behind you, or push a shopping cart, or hear the distant hum of tires on pavement, remember that movement began thousands of years ago, with someone who saw a log roll downhill and thought, that seems useful. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't prophecy. It was practicality, curiosity, persistence. And it hasn't stopped rolling since. You sit near the hearth, knees tucked to your chest, listening to the faint, rhythmic clack, clack echoing through the room. It's not threatening, it's not urgent, but it's constant. A woman works at a loom, her hands dancing over the wooden frame, guiding thread over thread, weft into warp, story into silence. The loom doesn't shout its importance. It doesn't crash through history books like war or plague. But make no mistake, this quiet machine helped build cities, economies, and empires. It helped clothe bodies, fund revolutions, and shape identities. And the people working them, they weren't nameless hands. They were architects of the everyday. Weaving is old, really old, pre-pottery old. Bits of woven flax dating back over 30,000 years have been found in caves in Georgia, the country, not the state. That's before writing, before farming, and long before anyone thought industry was a thing. Historians still argue whether looms developed independently in different regions or spread from one original invention. Either way, by the time humans were farming, they were weaving, taking raw fiber and turning it into thread, then turning that into cloth, linen, wool, cotton, eventually silk. The loom made it scalable. The earliest looms were horizontal sticks pegged into the ground, thread wrapped in place. Later came the vertical loom, where cloth could hang and be built upward, and eventually treadle looms, which let weavers use their feet to control tension and pattern. More speed, more precision, less backache. And who ran these looms? Women. Mostly, not always. Not everywhere, but in a lot of early societies, women were the masters of thread. While history lionized soldiers and kings, the weavers quietly outfitted them, the robe of the priest woven, the sail of the ship woven, the banner carried into battle woven, probably with a muttered prayer stitched into the hem. Here's something quirky. In some ancient cultures, woven cloth was currency. In parts of West Africa, strip-woven kente cloth held symbolic meanings, with certain patterns worn only by royalty. In Peru, woven garments denoted rank so precisely that even the Incan emperor's socks were coded for status. You weren't just putting on clothes, you were putting on hierarchy. And in medieval Europe, textile guilds held real power. Towns grew rich on wool. Wars were fought over dye routes. The entire Silk Road exists because of the desire for, well, silk. All because somewhere, a person at a loom knew how to make magic from fiber. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and the loom doesn't stay quiet. It gets louder, bigger, mechanical. The flying shuttle, invented in the 18th century, let a single weaver do the work of two. Then came the jacquard loom, which used punch cards to program complex patterns, an early whisper of computing. Historians still debate whether the jacquard loom directly influenced modern computing. But here's what's wild. Ada Lovelace, often considered the first computer programmer, was inspired by how looms used pattern logic. So yeah, your laptop might owe its lineage to a very fancy tablecloth. But progress wasn't gentle. As machines replaced hand weavers, the Luddite movement rose real people, skilled artisans, smashing looms to protest lost livelihoods. They weren't anti-technology, they were pro-survival. Their hands had built for centuries. Now, machines buzzed without them. And yet, the loom endures. Even today, in villages around the world, you'll find women and men weaving not just for work, but for storytelling. patterns passed down through generations, colors chosen for meanings, mourning, celebration, fertility. A bolt of cloth becomes a family archive. Here's a beautiful fringe tidbit. In Navajo weaving, it's traditional to include a spirit line, a small thread intentionally left imperfect, a reminder that nothing is flawless, that even beauty needs a way to breathe. Tonight, under your blanket or curled in your hoodie, you're wrapped in something ancient, some loom, somewhere, made what you're wearing. Whether it's mass-produced or hand-woven, it connects you backward and forward. The rhythm of the loom is a heartbeat, a pulse through time, one thread holding another, until the whole becomes strong. That's not noise, that's harmony. So next time you hear a sewing machine hum or see a scarf in a shop window, think of that soft clack-clack. Think of hands moving in silence, patterns forming slowly. Think of the loom not just as a tool, but as a voice, quiet, enduring, essential. You scrub your hands under warm water, lathering soap until bubbles bloom like tiny clouds. It smells faintly of lavender, clean, comforting. But what if I told you this humble little bar, slippery, quiet, often taken for granted, helped reshape civilization, not in a dramatic revolution kind of way, but in a you won't die from drinking the river anymore kind of way. Soap is older than you think. Probably older than your cynical thoughts about hygiene, too. Evidence of soapy mixtures, animal fat mixed with ashes, goes back at least 4,500 years to ancient Babylon. A few scribbled clay tablets from 2200 BCE mention it as something you'd use to wash wool, not yourself. Wool, because early soap wasn't about sparkle, it was practical, greasy, and probably smelled like disappointment. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians invented soap for cleaning, for medicine, or for craftwork. But by the time ancient Egyptians came around, they were using soap-like pastes for bodily cleanliness and even healing wounds. A bar of soap wasn't exactly sitting on the royal sink, but it was somewhere in the mix, quietly doing its job. And then Rome happened. Public baths, baby, giant pools, heated floors, social gossip, and a bunch of sweaty people rubbing themselves down with oil and scraping it off with Strigel's curved metal tools. Classy, sort of. Hygienic, debatable. Soap, as we know it, wasn't the star of the Roman hygiene scene, but it existed, and it evolved. Fast forward to medieval Europe and, well, it gets complicated. Some cities had soap guilds, like in Marseille or Castile, where recipes got fancy olive oil, goat tallow, even herbs. Soap making became an art. But here's the plot twist in much of medieval Europe. Bathing fell out of fashion. People feared that hot water opened the pores, letting in disease. The Black Death didn't help soap's popularity either. That's right, during one of the deadliest pandemics in history. Folks avoided soap, because of course they did. But across the Islamic world, soap making flourished. Chemists like Al-Razi recorded detailed recipes using lye and oils. Bathhouses thrived. Scented soaps were luxury goods. It's no coincidence that the regions prioritizing cleanliness often had lower disease transmission. But nobody was keeping score. Well, except historians centuries later. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient soaps weren't just about cleaning, they were magical. Charms, spells, love potions. Wash your hands, cleanse your spirit. And sometimes, the wrong soap could be accused of witchcraft. Why is your skin so smooth? Margaret, are you dabbling in Satan's bubbles again? And in the early modern period, soap's image started to shift from artisan product to household essential. With industrialization came mass production. Factories like Piers and later Procter & Gamble turned soap into a brand war. Advertisements screamed that cleanliness is next to godliness. which, spoiler, isn't even a Bible verse, just a very effective marketing tool. And there it is, the politics of cleanliness, because suddenly, to be clean wasn't just about hygiene. It was about morality, about status. The rich didn't just smell better. They were better, or so the ads implied. Soap became a silent enforcer of class lines. You could be poor, but if you were clean, well, maybe you were respectable. In Victorian England, missionaries brought soap to colonized regions, often with condescension attached. Washing became symbolic not just of physical purity, but of spiritual conversion. It's awkward, isn't it, how something as gentle as a bar of soap could be used to shame, erase, even colonize. Even so, there's no denying that soap saved lives. Once germ theory rolled around in the 19th century, thank you, Pasteur and Semmelweis, hand washing finally got the respect it deserved. Hospitals that introduced soap saw deaths plummet. Childbirth became safer. Surgery became survivable. And all it took was a little lather. And let's talk World War I. Soldiers died in trenches not just from bullets, but from lice, gangrene, and trench foot. Soap was issued like ammunition. Because without it, you weren't just uncomfortable, you were vulnerable. During World War II, soap was rationed. People made their own again, rendering fat, boiling ashes. Sound familiar? History has a way of circling back, like bubbles in a tub, and now you still depend on it. Pandemic hits, soap is your first line of defense. Your hands become battlegrounds. You sing happy birthday twice, not because you want to party, but because viral particles hate prolonged rinsing. Science meets song, and yet it's quiet. Soap doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beep or blink. It just sits by the sink, waiting to help. You probably used it today without thinking. And that's kind of its superpower, this slippery, humble, unscented hero that asks nothing in return. So tonight, as you wash your face or rinse your hands, give your bar of soap a little nod. It's done more for human health than almost any other invention. Not bad for something that vanishes after use. Lather, rinse, repeat. Civilization. One bubble at a time. You're crouched by the riverbank, sun low, shadows stretching, in your hand. A dull, flat stone across your lap. Another rock, this one ridged, grooved from repeated scraping. You hold a handful of grain. Slowly, patiently, you begin to grind, stone on stone, over and over. Nothing fancy, no flames, no roar, just pressure, rhythm, friction. This isn't the birth of fire, but in its own way. It's the start of cuisine and maybe even the birth of comfort itself. Before humans had pots, ovens, or recipes, they had grinding stones, mortars and pestles, saddle querns, and later, rotary mills. And what did those tools give them? A chance to transform the tough and the wild into something soft, chewable, nourishing. A fistful of grain into porridge, roots into mash, seeds into something spreadable. Historians still argue whether grinding tools signaled the start of agriculture or vice versa. Did we start growing grains because we had ways to process them, or did we invent grinders to handle the grains we gathered? Either way. By the time early humans began staying in one place, grinding stones were at the heart of home life. And here's your quirky bit: some archaeologists believe the earliest grinding tools go back over 30,000 years long before farming. Found in caves in what's now Israel and Europe, they weren't used for bread or rice. They were used to grind wild grasses, roots, nuts. It wasn't a banquet. It was survival. And it was quietly revolutionary, because grinding meant digestion. Once foods were pulverized, your body didn't have to work as hard to get nutrients. Children, elders, everyone could eat the same meals. Suddenly, age wasn't a disqualifier. The very young and very old could stay nourished, and with that came stronger communities. Now let's talk flour. The moment ground grain met water and fire, bread was born, flat breads at first, then leavened loaves. Every culture has some version naan, tortilla, pita, injera, bannock. But all of them started with someone kneeling by a stone, hands dusty, mind probably wandering. The first mills were human-powered. You'd push a grinding stone across another, hour after hour. It wasn't romantic, it was relentless. In many societies, it was women's work, passed from mother to daughter. Their hands knew the feel of good flour, the way yours might know the weight of a phone. Familiar, unspoken, fundamental. Then came animal-powered mills, donkeys and oxen walking in slow circles, dragging huge stones over grain. Later, water mills arrived in Greece and Rome. The Romans, ever the overachievers, industrialized flour. Giant mills powered by water wheels could feed entire cities. Quiet, not anymore, but still. Grinding. In medieval Europe, owning a mill was power. Lords taxed peasants not just on their grain, but on their right to grind it. You couldn't just go grind your own wheat, you had to use the lord's mill and pay a fee. Bread was freedom, but grinding, that was politics. And in Japan, finely ground green tea matcha became the center of an entire spiritual practice. It wasn't just about drinking. It was about preparing, grinding the leaves into powder, whisking, breathing, being present. A meditation disguised as a beverage. Want a scientific twist? Grinding also changes food chemically. It releases oils, enhances flavors, activates nutrients. Think about the smell of fresh ground coffee or a crushed garlic clove. You can't fake that. Your ancestors figured it out with nothing more than 2 rocks and some stubbornness. And then, of course, there's the mortar and pestle. Found in ancient Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in Stone Age Scandinavia, still in your grandma's kitchen, if you're lucky. Salsa, pesto, curry paste, guacamole, none of them exist without this deceptively simple tool. Grinding is an act of transformation, not explosive, not instant, but total. A hard kernel becomes flour. A bitter root becomes a balm. A bitter memory, if you're lucky, becomes a lesson. It's alchemy by abrasion, even now, in a world of blenders and food processors. Some chefs still swear by stone grinding, not because it's easy, but because it connects them back to something ancient, something felt, food that isn't just made, but earned. So tonight, if you have a warm slice of bread nearby, or a bowl of porridge, or even a spoonful of something smooth and fragrant, pause. It got there by being broken down lovingly, patiently, by someone who believed that something tough could become something tender. Grinding isn't glamorous, but it's sacred. It's survival turned art. It's time made edible. You press your thumb against a small bump in the bark of a tree. Sap sticks to your skin thick, amber, vaguely sweet. It pulls into a strand as you move your hand. Nothing much, just nature doing its gooey thing. But this sticky little miracle, it once held entire civilizations together. Literally. Glue, resin, adhesive, whatever you call it. This quiet invention has been sticking around, pun very much intended, for tens of thousands of years. And it's one of those things you only notice when it isn't working. Looking at you, broken sandal strap. The earliest evidence of glue dates back over 200,000 years, with Neanderthals using birch bark tar to haft stone tools onto wooden handles. That's right long before pottery, before metal. Our cousins were already crafting composite tools using DIY adhesives, not just smashing rocks together engineering. Chew on that next time someone calls them primitive. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals discovered glue by accident, maybe burning bark near a fire, or whether they figured out the complex distillation process on purpose. Because here's the kicker. You can't just tap a birch tree and get glue. You have to heat the bark without burning it. Slowly, carefully. In a low-oxygen environment, that's ancient chemistry. That's intentional. And glues kept evolving. Ancient Egyptians used animal-based glues for furniture, papyrus, and tomb decoration. The Assyrians sealed their clay tablets with sticky tree sap. In China, early bookbinding was made possible by starch-based glue, letting pages stick instead of flap in the wind. But the big breakthrough came with hide glue boiled down animal parts. Yes, hooves and bones that dried into one of the strongest natural adhesives known to humanity. Roman and Greek artisans used it in everything from shields to ships. So did violin makers, marquetry masters, and painters. Even Renaissance cathedrals have panels still held in place by horse glue. Quirky fact: some antique violins, like Stradivari's, are still held together with hide glue. If one pops open in dry weather, luthiers don't panic. They expect it. That's part of the magic. It's strong, but also reversible, just like a good apology. And not all ancient adhesives were animal-based. Indigenous peoples across the Americas used pine resin, sometimes mixed with charcoal or beeswax, to make waterproof sealants. Think birch bark canoes, arrowheads, or even waterproof baskets. You know, essential life stuff. Even spider silk got in on the action. In Southeast Asia, sticky webs were sometimes used as emergency sutures. Picture it jungle surgery, with nothing but a spider and a prayer. As for the Middle Ages, monks relied on glue for illuminating manuscripts. That delicate gold leaf border stuck in place with a mixture of egg white and glue. Because nothing says devotion like gluing letters for 7 hours straight while squinting by candlelight. And glue didn't just hold things, it enabled things. Take clothing. Before metal fasteners and buttons, people used glue to stiffen collars, bind shoes, and even set dyes. You don't usually think of fashion and adhesives in the same breath. But try sewing a doublet without some stiffening and you'll end up in a historical wardrobe malfunction. Let's leap ahead a few centuries to the invention of synthetic glues in the early 20th century. Suddenly, you didn't need a cauldron of boiling bones in your backyard to make things stick. Bakelite, rubber cement, epoxy, this was the glue of modernity. Airplanes, skyscrapers, satellites, all held together not just by rivets and steel, but by glue. Invisible, indispensable, quirky little twist. The invention of Post-it notes was actually an accident, an attempt to make a super strong adhesive that failed miserably because it was too weak. But that failure led to a revolution in office life. Proof that sometimes things don't need to hold forever, just long enough. And then there's the glue that holds bones. Orthopedic surgeons use medical adhesives to help repair broken tissue. Dentists use glue to mount crowns. Neurosurgeons have developed glues to help close brain wounds. Not quite the same as sap on a spear, but still. Sticky saves lives. And of course, there's emotional glue too. Shared meals, inside jokes, family recipes scrawled in fading ink, bonds that don't look like much, but hold people together across decades, maybe centuries. Not flashy, not loud, just strong. So tonight, look around. The soles of your shoes, the binding of your book, the little label on your tea bag, it's all stuck quietly, faithfully, thanks to someone somewhere who figured out how to turn bark or bones or bugs into a bridge between two things that didn't want to stay connected. And tomorrow, when something breaks, and it will, you'll reach for the glue. You'll press, hold, and wait. And in that moment, you'll be echoing a ritual older than memory fixing. Not discarding, rejoining, not replacing. One drop at a time. You're sitting by candlelight, though, if we're being honest. It's probably an LED bulb shaped like a candle, because fire's a bit much indoors these days. Still, the glow is soft, golden, flickering, and in that light, shadows stretch, stories unfold, and something timeless begins you read. It seems so normal now. Look, squiggle, understand. But writing, especially alphabetic writing, is one of the quietest revolutions ever to shape the human mind. Not flashy, not bloody, but utterly transformative. Before alphabets, we had symbols. Complex writing systems like cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs were beautiful, but elite hard to learn, harder to use. Only scribes and priests really mastered them. Information stayed locked behind a wall of strokes and lines. But somewhere around 1200 BCE, in the Eastern Mediterranean, someone decided enough was enough. Instead of symbols for whole words or syllables, what if each mark stood for a sound? Enter the Phoenicians' traders, seafarers, and the likely inventors of the first true alphabet. Just 22 characters, no vowels, brutally efficient. Suddenly, you didn't need to memorize hundreds of pictograms, just a handful of shapes, and you could spell anything from fish to freedom. Historians still argue whether the Phoenician script evolved entirely from Egyptian hieroglyphs or had parallel influences, but either way, it spread like wildfire. Greek merchants adopted it and added vowels. Romans copied the Greeks and reshaped it, and boom, our modern alphabet was born. ABC, easy as 1, 2, 3. And that's the thing, once you have an alphabet, anyone can learn to write. You don't need to belong to a temple. You don't need a lifetime of training. You just need repetition, patience, and probably a very stern teacher tapping your wrist with a stick. Here's your quirky bit in ancient Rome. Students practiced their letters on wax tablets, reusable little boards where they could scribble, erase, and scribble again. The Roman equivalent of a whiteboard, minus the dry erase smell. And if they made too many mistakes, well, the wax got melted and flattened. The original rage quit. Alphabets changed how we think. Literally. Oral cultures pass knowledge in stories, parables, loops. Written language, especially alphabetic, encourages linear logic, step-by-step thinking, lists, philosophy, law codes, contracts, all made easier when every sound has a symbol, and every word can be broken down into parts. But alphabets weren't just practical. They were portable. Scrolls, wax, parchment. Walls, once you had a simple, compact script, you could take language anywhere. Soldiers carved graffiti into barracks. Lovers scratched notes onto pots. Traders labeled amphorae with contents and prices. The alphabet democratized writing, and then came books. First scrolls, then codices, what we think of as the modern book format. Bound pages, easier to flip through, harder to drop down a well. By the Middle Ages, monasteries were copying manuscripts by hand, painstakingly, beautifully, illuminated with gold, with ivy curling around the margins. But it was still slow, still exclusive, until Johannes Gutenberg came along and quietly unleashed chaos with movable type. The Gutenberg press circa 1440 didn't invent printing. The Chinese and Koreans had done that centuries earlier, using block printing and even metal type. But Gutenberg made it scalable for Europe. And suddenly, instead of a few books per year, you could produce hundreds, then thousands. Then brace yourself, pamphlets. You might think pamphlets sound harmless. But when people started printing their own ideas, religious rants, scientific discoveries, political complaints, the world changed. The Protestant Reformation, in part, was powered by print. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, viral content, and all because of letters. Simple letters. Still, printing wasn't just for revolution. It brought stories, fairy tales, herbal remedies, bad poetry, chess manuals. Suddenly, the mind could stretch farther than the body ever could, and reading changed our brains. Neuroscientists now believe that literacy rewires how we process language and memory. You become more analytical, more reflective. You slow down. You see thought, not just hear it. Even now, in your digital age, the alphabet rules. Every text, every tweet, every you-up is just the latest echo of that ancient Phoenician gamble to give sounds a home on paper. Want a full circle moment? Those early Phoenician traders, sailing from port to port, inscribing crates of cedar and glass, never could have imagined that one day their letters would form words like iPhone or username or password 123. But they do, and they still work. So tonight, as your eyes trace this line of letters, know this: each one is ancient. Each one holds a sound that someone once spoke into firelight, centuries ago. You're not just reading, you're time-traveling. Sound, frozen in shape. Voice, made visible, all from a few quiet marks on an even quieter page. You feel a breeze on your cheek and hear it, a soft, layered rustle, almost like rain, but lighter. It's fabric, a tent swaying in the wind, or a sail snapping into shape, or maybe just a robe, long and loose, brushing past stone. You're not in a palace, you're not in a machine shop. You're somewhere far older in the shadow of the awning. Because before buildings, before books, before bricks even, humans made shelter from fabric. Stitched, stretched, draped, knotted, portable, adaptable, and quietly revolutionary. We don't know exactly when the first humans decided to stretch animal skins over sticks to make a tent, but we have strong evidence that by 40,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers were creating semi-permanent fabric-based shelters, not skyscrapers, not castles, just thoughtful layers between body and weather. Fabric as architecture. Historians still argue whether these early structures counted as homes or camps. But from Siberia to the Sahara, tents gave people a mobile base. You could chase herds, avoid floods, shift with the seasons, and still sleep dry. Not bad for some sinew and hide. Later, fabric shelters got fancier. The nomads of Central Asia perfected the yurt, a circular, wood-framed tent covered in felt, insulated, spacious, and so stable it could withstand serious wind. In the desert, the Bedouin black tent, made of woven goat hair, kept out sun and sand while allowing breezes through. Form and function, every stitch earned. And then came the sail. Yes, fabric again, but this time lifted to catch wind, not block it. A simple idea with massive consequences. One stretched rectangle of cloth, and suddenly, humans could cross rivers faster. Then lakes, then oceans. Sails date back at least 5,000 years, first appearing in Mesopotamia and Egypt. These early vessels hugged coastlines. But the concept, radical. You're moving without paddling, letting the wind carry you, all because someone figured out how to shape and control cloth. Here's your quirky tidbit. Viking sails were made from tightly woven wool, soaked in animal fat to make them water-resistant. Heavy. Sure, but it worked. Those iconic dragon-headed longships slicing through mist, powered by itchy, greasy fabric. History isn't always glamorous. And sails didn't just help exploration. They created empires. The Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Chinese all developed advanced sailing tech. By the age of exploration, canvas sails were global engines of trade, conquest, and migration. Fabric powered it all. Silently, relentlessly. Even today, ships still sail sometimes for pleasure, sometimes for performance. In the America's Cup, high-tech sails are made from carbon fiber and Kevlar, but the soul remains the dance between wind and cloth. Meanwhile, back on land, fabric was reshaping life in other ways. Take canopies and curtains. In ancient India, palaces were cooled with draped fabric soaked in water. In medieval Europe, canopies over beds weren't just stylish. They were insulation, privacy, warmth, maybe even status. A tent, shrunk down and refined, became indoor elegance. Think also of flags. Technically just dyed fabric, but charged with symbolism. The battle standard, the family crest, the religious banner fluttering above a temple, color-coded communication that ripples in the wind and says, "This is who we are." And then umbrellas. Yes, umbrellas. First used in Mesopotamia and later refined in ancient China and Egypt. They weren't just for rain. They were symbols of power, privilege, and shade. To sit beneath cloth stretched above you, that was luxury and relief. What's fascinating is how fabric invites transformation. You can fold it, cut it, dye it, stitch meaning into it, unlike stone or metal. Cloth is alive, responsive to its user, always changing, and fabric's quiet contribution to health, massive. Hospital drapes, bandages, swaddling cloths for newborns, all made from woven threads. During plagues and pandemics, even basic cloth masks helped save lives. A strip of cotton across a face, not high-tech, but life-saving nonetheless. Here's a fun scientific fact: the development of parachutes. Yes, those life-saving drops from the sky also relied entirely on fabric innovation. Leonardo da Vinci sketched the idea, but it wasn't until the 18th century that someone actually jumped with one and survived, floating gently back to Earth thanks to stitched silk. And let's not forget fashion. More than vanity, clothing has always been a language of identity tribe, profession, gender, mood, and underneath all that fabric, quietly holding shape, whispering who you are before you speak a word. So tonight, as your blanket hugs your shoulders, or your curtains sway with the breeze, remember this fabric isn't just softness. It's structure, it's shelter, it's motion, it's memory. And it got us across deserts, down rivers, through storms, one fold at a time. You run your hand across the wall. It's cool, smooth, almost silky, not stone, not wood. It's something else, something that didn't come from a quarry or a forest. This surface was made, molded, fired. It came from the earth, but it didn't stay earth. It became ceramic, the quietest alchemy known to civilization. Clay is humble. You find it under your feet, in riverbeds, under hillsides. But give it water and shape and flame, and it transforms. It becomes permanent, and the first people to discover that they weren't trying to make art. They were just trying to hold water. Archaeologists believe the first ceramic vessels date back 20,000 years to Japan's Jomon culture. Simple bowls, rope-patterned, fired in open flames. No kilns, no glazing, just fire and dirt making something stronger than either alone. Historians still debate whether pottery arose in one place or multiple. But by 10,000 BCE, it had spread across East Asia and began appearing in the Middle East. Agriculture was beginning, and with it came the need to store grain, oil, water, dreams. Pottery made settlement possible. And what's more peaceful than a pot? You don't make pottery in a hurry. It's a slow craft. You knead the clay to remove air bubbles. You coil it, pinch it, wheel it. You let it dry. You fire it. Sometimes it cracks. Sometimes it shatters. But when it works, It lasts for millennia. Literally. There's no better time capsule than a broken shard. Quirky tidbit. In ancient Greece, broken pots called ostraca were used as ballots. Citizens would scratch names into pottery fragments to vote someone into exile. That's where the word ostracize comes from. Democracy, powered by discarded dishes. And in Mesoamerica, Maya artisans created ceramic calendars, incense burners, and godly figurines with incredible detail. Clay wasn't just utility, it was storytelling. You could hold a myth in your hand. Later, ceramics elevated into porcelain, the white gold of China. By the Tang and Song dynasties, Chinese potters had mastered kaolin clay and high-temperature kilns, producing thin, translucent bowls that rang like bells when tapped. Europeans were dazzled. They tried for centuries to replicate it and failed until finally cracking the code in Meissen, Germany, in the early 1700s. Porcelain didn't just change dinnerware, it reshaped trade routes. Ships carried tons of it across oceans. It filled royal cabinets. It became a marker of taste and wealth, all from soil, heat, and patience. Meanwhile, back at the village hearth, earthenware and stoneware kept doing their quiet duty. Crocks, jugs, cooking pots, none of them flashy, but all of them faithful. Before refrigeration, before plastic wrap, ceramics kept food safe and water clean. Not glamorous, just essential. And ceramics didn't stop at bowls. They became bricks, fired clay, stacked in rows, building cities. Babylon, Mohenjo-Daro, ancient Rome all rose on the backs of humble bricks. Not one brick, millions. Each one placed by hand, hardened by fire, ready to hold a roof or resist a flood. Then came tiles, decorative, durable, and hygienic. Islamic art perfected geometric tilework mosaics that turned mosques into math poems. In Europe, Delft tiles told stories in blue and white. In Asia, roof tiles shimmered like dragon scales. Architecture began to sparkle. And you want science. Ceramics gave us insulators. Modern electronics wouldn't exist without them. Your phone, your laptop, your earbuds all contain ceramic parts, not to mention the heat-resistant tiles on space shuttles. That's right. The stuff that once lined your grandma's soup pot now protects astronauts on re-entry. But the real magic of ceramics is that it's both ancient and futuristic. It belongs in museums and on Mars. It holds your coffee and your dental fillings. It's fragile, but also timeless. And every time you drink from a mug, you're part of that history. Here's something fringe but fascinating in some indigenous cultures. Potters believe the clay has a spirit. You speak to it, you shape it with respect. If it breaks in the kiln, maybe it wasn't ready. Maybe it wasn't meant to hold that story yet. So tonight, when you hear the clink of a teacup or the thunk of a casserole dish, listen closely. That's more than dinnerware. That's memory. That's fire speaking in a whisper. Ceramics don't boast. They endure. They break. They're mended. They remind us that permanence isn't loud, it's earned. You walk across the room, and the faintest click answers underfoot. No, it's not a tripwire. It's your light switch. You don't think about it, you just flick your finger and boom. The sun is back, bottled and obedient. But behind that little click lies centuries of slow, quiet genius, the harnessing of light. Before the bulb, before electricity, humans were at war with darkness. Fire gave us flame. Sure, but open flames are dangerous, smoky and stubborn. Candles and oil lamps gave off weak, flickering light. You could write a love letter by them, if you didn't mind setting your sleeve on fire. But it was the invention of controlled, portable light, from lamps to lanterns to LEDs, that quietly stretched the human day, redefined productivity, and softened fear. Let's back up. The earliest lamps. They were just shallow stone bowls filled with animal fat, with a bit of moss or fiber as a wick. These pop up around 15,000 years ago in places like France and the Levant. Small, crude, but they burned. That alone was revolutionary. Historians still argue whether light sources developed independently in each region or spread from a single origin point. But what's certain is this: every early society cherished light like treasure. It wasn't just function, it was life. Sacred, ritualistic, the flame that never went out. That was hope. And then, the oil lamp rose to prominence. Terracotta lamps filled with olive oil lit the homes and temples of the Greeks and Romans. The Talmud describes families saving oil just for the Sabbath lamp. In Hindu traditions, the diya, a small clay lamp, still shines during Diwali. Light isn't just physics, it's belief, love, remembrance. Fast forward a bit. The candle takes over. Beeswax if you were rich. Tallow if you weren't, and let's be real. Tallow stinks. By the Middle Ages, monks were the main candle producers. Churches glowed while peasants squinted. Light was still a luxury. Quirky detail: Vikings made candles from fish. Specifically, dried fish with naturally oily flesh, threaded with wicks. Yes, they basically set their dinner on fire for visibility. Multi-purpose, if a little pungent. Then came gaslight in the 18th and 19th centuries. Whole cities lit up: Paris, London, New York lamplighters strolling the streets at dusk with long poles, setting the town aglow one flame at a time. It was magical, and it was deadly. Gas leaks, explosions, suffocating fumes, but progress. Right, the big turning point. Though electric light. You probably know the Edison story: filament, bulb, ta-da. But he wasn't the only one. British inventors like Humphrey Davy and Joseph Swan laid groundwork before him, and even Edison, savvy businessman that he was, didn't just invent the bulb, he designed the whole system: wires, switches, power stations, the full infrastructure of light. By the early 20th century, cities sparkled, factories ran late, families gathered around reading lamps instead of hearths. Light changed how we worked, how we lived, how we slept. Our circadian rhythms shifted. The night shrank, and we never went back. Want something fun? Early electric advertisements were obsessed with the idea that light was clean. Ads showed pristine kitchens glowing with bulbs, contrasting them with sooty gas lamps. Light became associated with purity, modernity, even morality. No shadows here. Sir, we're an electric household. And the military, they took notes. Searchlights, flashlights, signal lamps. In both world wars, the ability to see at night and to not be seen was power. Quiet. Strategic power. Then came the fluorescent tube, the halogen lamp, the LED. Suddenly, light wasn't just available, it was customizable. Soft white for cozy evenings, bright blue for a sterile lab, flashing pink for your local frozen yogurt shop. But the quiet revolution was still happening behind the scenes. Photovoltaics, solar cells, turned light into electricity. Entire villages now power lights from the sun. No wires, no grid, just panels, batteries, and a switch. Fringe. Tidbit. In the 21st century, researchers are experimenting with bioluminescent plants and living streetlights using genetically engineered algae to glow gently in the dark. One day, you might sit under a lamp that breathes. And light doesn't just show the way, it communicates. Fiber optics, infrared signals, even Li-Fi technology that transmits data through LED pulses. You could be downloading cat memes over a flickering desk lamp and not even know it. Still, for all its science, light retains its intimacy, the soft glow of a nightlight in a child's room. The warm flicker of a campfire, the hush of streetlights coming on in a sleepy town. You know those moments, the ones where the light isn't just illumination, it's a presence. Tonight, look around. Every little light, the phone charging by your bed, the bulb in the fridge, the soft halo around your curtain reminds you that you're not in the dark. Not really. Not anymore. Thanks to 1,000 tiny inventions, across 1,000 silent years, we made the sun behave. Not with a roar, not with a shout, just with a switch. You sit quietly, stretching your toes under a soft blanket, the day settling behind you like dust in a sunbeam. Nearby, your spoon clinks gently against a bowl. Steam curls upward. Soup, maybe, or tea, or warm rice. Whatever it is, it's been cooked, and not just on fire. It's been contained, boiled, simmered, made possible by one of the quietest inventions in human history. The pot, not the idea of cooking. That's older. Roasting on open flames, ember-baked roots, meat on a stick. But once we learned to boil to keep liquid over heat and control it, we unlocked a different kind of sustenance. One that didn't just feed the body, but nourished society. You can't boil water on a stick. You need a vessel. And that's where things got clever. The earliest known pots date back over 18,000 years, from sites in what's now China. Simple earthen containers, low-fired but strong enough to hold bubbling liquids. Game changers. Suddenly, you weren't limited to what fire could scorch. Now you could make broths, gruels, herbal tonics, soft food, food for the sick, the old, the toothless. You made meals with patience, not flame. Historians still argue whether pot cooking spurred the development of agriculture or if it was the other way round. Did people settle because they could cook grains, or did they learn to cook grains because they finally had pots? Whichever came first. The pot was a quiet hero of the Neolithic Revolution, and it wasn't just about the food. Pottery became time travel. A clay shard can tell us what people ate, what they stored, even what kind of bacteria fermented on their dishes. We've reconstructed ancient beer recipes from pot residues. Historians have sniffed out old stews using lipid analysis. Yes, science can now detect 5,000-year-old curry. You're welcome. Here's your quirky fact in some indigenous Amazonian communities. Broken pot fragments were added back into new pots. It wasn't just recycling, it was ancestral continuity. Every vessel held the past inside it. Literally, as societies advanced, pots got fancier, glazed, painted, decorated with stories. In ancient Greece, amphorae weren't just containers, they were status objects, prize jars for Olympic victors, burial urns for warriors. In Japan, tea ceremony pots became sacred, revered for their imperfection. In Morocco, the tagine pot shaped the national cuisine. In India, the humble clay matka still keeps water cool with zero electricity. And pot making itself a meditation, centering a lump of clay on a wheel, coaxing it upward, steadying your hand. It's a quiet, rhythmic act that ties a person to the earth and the fire and everything in between. To make a pot is to prepare for someone's hunger. It's kindness in terracotta form. Fast-forward metal cookware enters the scene. Bronze, iron, copper. Pots got tougher, more durable, more expensive. Rich households boiled stews in copper cauldrons. Poorer folks stuck with clay or cast iron. But the soul of it, the containment, the heat, the bubble of transformation stayed the same, even in modern times. Pots continue to evolve. Non-stick pans, pressure cookers, slow cookers, rice cookers. We invented appliances to do what the pot always did: hold the moment. Let time and heat do their thing. Cook with love, or at least convenience. Fringe tidbit. In 2017, an AI trained on ancient pot shapes helped archaeologists identify trade routes across the Mediterranean. Apparently, even algorithms appreciate a good casserole dish. But at the core of it all, the pot didn't just change how we cooked, it changed how we shared. Once you had a pot, you could cook for more than one. You could simmer soup for a village elder. You could ladle porridge for a tired child. You could carry a dish across the field and say, "Here, eat." That's civilization in a bowl. And so tonight, as your own pot simmers down and the lights dim and the windows reflect your quiet silhouette, take a breath. You're part of a lineage of gatherers, cookers, servers, people who believed that to contain warmth, to transform raw into ready, was a kind of love. Not shouted, not grand, just steady. Because in the end, it's not the loud inventions that shape us. It's the ones that slip into our lives, unnoticed, until we realize we'd be lost without them. So now, you've wandered through a world built not by explosions or declarations, but by quiet genius. Soap that saved lives without ceremony. Pots that boiled stories into sustenance. Letters, fabrics, lights, threads all soft-spoken, all essential. It's strange, isn't it, how the things that shape us most often arrive without fanfare. They whisper rather than shout. They ask for nothing, but give everything. They hold, they connect, they carry. And in a world that often glorifies speed and noise and brightness, it's comforting to know that stillness has its own power, that progress doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just flickers softly, like a lamp in a dark room. So as you drift now, eyes heavy, breath slowing, remember the layers beneath your life, the inventions that hold you up, not just the walls and wires, but the knowledge, the craftsmanship, the patient hands across centuries. You're never alone in the quiet. Every pot you lift, every page you turn, every thread that wraps around your shoulders, it's all a conversation with history, a hush shared across time. And tonight, there's nothing left to do. No alarms, no lists, just this moment. Let your mind settle into the calm. Let the soft hum of invention cradle you. Close your eyes and let the quiet carry you home.